Rolling.
Okay. Well, thanks to everybody for joining me here tonight. It's actually kind of an honor to be able to talk about our bills, so I'm just going to get right to it. Essentially what I'm going to talk about in my opening remarks, essentially I'm just going to tell you who I am. I'm a broadcast technician here at Rogers Media, and I've been here since the score was bought out, so it's been a good transition for me, and I'm really happy that Rogers has treated me so well. So I'll start off with that. Secondly, I will just throw up this slide. Essentially, this is giving us a timeline of just what had to happen and what time frame it had to happen. We started doing our original planning as an engineering team around June 1st. So all the AutoCAD and all the planning on how we were going to do this. Now, as Andrew has talked about, there's a lot of moving parts, say, in that planning. So you'd always have to have a contingency plan. Then we started with our construction on July 15th. So we pretty much had to design a whole new room. We had a space on, they call it the mezzanine on the 10th floor. It was just had a riser floor, but that's all it had. So we had to work with CBC and SNC Lavalin, and we had to build that room out. We built walls. We raised the floor another 8 inches on the back deck of that control room. We also had to do all the millwork within in that time frame. So that was a pretty big undertaking. The other thing too was Andrew had talked about it. I was one of the broadcast technicians at the Score Media, so I was familiar, and we were going to use a lot of the systems, some of the systems that was already at King Street, this old Score location. So part of that was just moving the gear over to pre-testing. The wiring started around August 18th. I remember many days where the AC unit wasn't up yet, and we were running wires and why construction is going on. It was sort of that sort of scene in that control room. It was very interesting because I learned that my marriage is strong. I went 3 months. I think I had 3 days off, and I worked 16-hour days. So it was a long haul, and so we're still together, so that's good.
Andy had a child.
Yes, and I had a newborn, so it was quite a scene. But so we went from there. We got construction completed, and I want to say a thank you to Unity, because as you can tell, just looking at this graph, we had a 4-week window to wire all this thing and really get it to a point where we could wire and test. So there was wires being run while we were testing other gear. So just on that, and then October 8th was our on-air date. Obviously, production needed to get in there before that time, so obviously we had a little bit of a leeway there. The next slide, I just want to, no one person really does anything this big without a great team around them, and I just want to say thank you to a lot of people. I want to say thank you to Frank for one. I've never been in, had a more supportive manager in the sense that I don't think I was ever turned down, so that was always good. And I want to thank Brian Leroy came on later on to help me as a manager as well, so I want to thank those people. I want to thank my team at our engineering team, Simon Patno, Matt Payne, and Mike Carroll, and Kadam here. All of them really helped me out, so I want to thank that. The other thing too, with the interesting thing about this build was, is you see that working with different engineers it strengthens your sort of engineering base, and I want to say a big thank you to the CBC team that we worked with. In particular, Paul Stoikoff, because there was lots of nights at 10:30 at night, I'd be phoning him and we'd be talking over things. So, and another thing too is on the list is the companies that we worked with. Unity was involved in a lot of the drawing drawing of the CAD drawings as well, and it also involved with the wiring. And those 16-hour days, those guys were with me. So I want to particularly thank Mark Johnson and Doug Walden. ORAD, it was Colin Sy. He really helped us there. He was another guy, no matter what time of night you could phone him. And then we had Broad Networks, Al Ferguson. And from Applied, we had Eugene and Paul Steckley and his team. And then for audio, we really leaned heavily on RP Dynamics and John Christie. So we'll get that all out of the way. Now we're actually going to go to the video overview. Come on.
That's where I realize I'm missing a plug-in on my laptop. There we go.
Maybe it's just taking a while to come up. All right, well, sorry for it being so small. Essentially, Andrew talked about the NHL MLPS network. So really, the system here is, here at our facility, we don't, there's really no transmit facility here. All our lines and everything else feed at OMP. So the hub for any game feed, anything like that, would come to OMP as the central hub, and then it would come to us. So all those encoders and decoders would demarc at OMP. They would take the games live, we would take the games and use them for our content and the intermission shows. It would come in and we had 35 lines going to us and 14 lines going back to them. And we had, we had a Mux fiber, and that's sort of how that worked. Then it would come into our system here at CBC. We have everything on a redundant path, so we had one fiber path was going through 151 front. The other one was a direct to Rogers, so everything was set on 2x1s. So if we lost one path, we wouldn't really notice it. The only people that would notice it is Evertz Vistalink would tell us that we lost a path. So everything was done redundantly that way. Essentially, we went into their lines here, their router, their system. We have a demarc point on their 6th floor. The other thing too with the way I came is everything in our sort of at the score days was very, very close. It wasn't fiber to everywhere and everything else, so it was getting an understanding of that because this building's so large. So your demarc points on the 6th floor, your studio is up on the 10th floor, so there was a lot of fiber going each and every sort of different places. The one thing we had is 39 feeds going, were frame synced and DA that were going into CBC's production router. So the reason we did that is because we had to go into CBC's control room 40. It's sort of we sort of earmarked that as our big production facility. So essentially they were going to do the Hockey Night in Canada Saturday nights. So we needed we needed to get these feeds onto their system so we could use control room 40. CBC was gracious enough to give us another 15 lines to our control room. One of the days that me and Andrew were talking is that we were sitting there going, wow, we don't have enough lines going to our control room. So what we had to do is we had to run some EDO and ODE cards directly to our control room, which is represented with another 20 lines before it hits their CBC router going up to our control room directly. It gave us more flexibility. We could do more, especially with the ORRAD. The ORRAD takes a lot of different feeds, and they wanted a lot of different content than from what the other lines were doing through our router. We used ROS expression for all our tickers and in-games. We also used iPowwow for a lot of different graphics and sort of social media content. We used all our bases here for name keys. A lot of our graphic content comes from our chirons. We had to add two channel mosaics in control room 40, and we also had to add 2 in our control room in 41. We also had a VizRT Libero system we brought in, and we tied into CBC's facility. The other thing too is it was interesting because we're working with, as Andrew's already said with the Quantel, is we're working with Quantel. So a lot of our systems wouldn't work with the gain flow that we're using with CBC. So we use 3 of their EVSs. During the playoffs and special events, we're actually up to 5 EVSs that we use through CBC. And that's including our Quantel system. Each control room has, the control room 40 has 2 baseband playouts for Quantel. And our control room upstairs has 3. So any feed that you would see at OMP, we could play out instantly on our end here. You know, slight delay. And then we also, we're using Sony cameras for Hockey Night Canada. We use their 1500 Sonys. So I brought over some cameras from King Street to work with Control Room 41. They were Panasonics. There were 5 931s, and we bought some 3500s just so we could match with them. And then we had there's 7 or 8, depending on how many we needed. We could rent the cameras through CBC. The other interesting thing is that the thing with CBC's control room is it's obviously on the 10th floor, and all their tubs and everything else is on the 6th floor. So there's a lot of demuxes and fibers going up to that room. So how they do monitoring and they're doing their audio is mixed on the 10th floor, so there's a lot of demuxes that have to happen with those HDSDI lines coming up. They use VIP 8s. We, in our control room, have used an existing MVP system from King Street. Yeah, I'll get to a little more about our control room. It was funny, this is another thing, you can just see it grow, is that at first we said, you know what, I don't think we need a router in our control room. We have CBC's router, there's no need for a router. But we ended up with a 128 squared, and it's almost full right now. What happened was the ORAD system actually took 60 destinations for the video display on the studio floor. So it was and it controls it. All those router points, anything they want to see, they can automatically go to their TD client and jump any source into any monitor. We had an existing Ross Vision at our facility at King Street. We added some inputs. It's got 64 HDSDI in and 48 HDSDI out. We had a Studer Vista console that we repurposed again. It had 23 HDSDI input de-embedders, and it had 5 routables on top of that. And then we had our Evertz MVP system, so all feeds would hit it. We use Blackstorm as a lot of our transitions between sources on our vision is triggered. We used our teleprompter auto cue system that Rogers uses at OMP. Yeah, we use a couple Ross expressions. So I'll just go to the next slide. Okay. Audio overview. The interesting thing, and I think the one of the most difficult thing, is that you can see around us the frequencies are. It's such a hard thing to nail down frequencies in a building like this. John Christie, I think the battle was kind of lively sometimes, but really that was one of the main things. So we went with the Shure Axion system. A lot of people would go digital. We obviously went with that analog system. But the one thing that we thought that was the advantage there is that we had the spectrum manager, and anytime somebody jumped on one of our frequencies, we had backup frequencies that it would jump to automatically. You would not see it on air. It would just jump. And you might hear a little pop, but not much. And that was one of the big advantages of going with that system, especially in this room. There was a time when the auto show was going on. We were getting jumped on a couple times doing that show. So, you know, we work together with CBC, and they have, you know, a good list, and they follow that. But with so many people, so many media coming through this building, you don't know who's going to jump on your frequency, really. So you had to back yourself up there. So we have 22 IFBs using the PSM system for sure. We had 19 labs and 4 handhelds out there. We used with the AXT's 400s. They have AES and analog out. So what we did is we went to a MADI system. So we went with direct out technologies, and we used anti-ammos. Essentially, we split them up into two fiber paths going upstairs. One fiber path, one of the analog outs would go to one of the other stage boxes, the other one, AES out, would go to the other. And then it would all come up MADI to our CER 41. The reason we did this is that CBC already had some of this MADI infrastructure in place, and to go to 2 different consoles, the SSL board in 40 and our board in our room, our Vista, it was just better to use MADI as a source for that. Essentially after that comes up, we split it off into 2 routers. CBC has their router, we have our router. And the other thing too is we use MADI for even our intercoms. So the other thing I'll talk about is we use the free speak system from Clearcom. We had an Eclipse frame actually on our studio floor. And what we did is we sent MADI channels of groups of different control rooms. In our control room, because you really don't know which control room is going to be controlling a segment of the set, because the free speech system gave us the opportunity that anybody could just turn on the bell pack and actually pick the role in which control room they were supposed to talk to. And that way you wouldn't get crosstalk between other controls because you're all in the same control room. So we used that Clearcom system. So that was all MADI. So our atoms were all hooked up through MADI, and you would direct any of those channels to our Clearcom system that would use the free speak on any of those bell packs. It's really it's a nice system to do it that way because, like I said, anybody can go from any control room. We also did it with monitoring. So MADI was our monitoring way in our control rooms if we wanted any sound on the floor. Essentially, you would go up to any speaker station, and you could actually turn a MADI dial, and it would actually pick which control room you wanted the sound coming from that speaker. So you would just pick which channel it was going to be on. We had a couple. A couple engineering monitoring stations. We also used it because we have a remote control room. We used it to go into Everts and Bedders and actually go over to our own P control room so they could get the audio off of that. So we could change up any mic. That was the other advantage with using a MADI router, is that any audio we wanted to feed OMP through those embedders could be changed because they were on our MADI router. Our RTS Atom M system is what we bought. We had got a 64 Omnino card. CBC was gracious enough the first year to let our system sit on their VLAN, so we were totally integrated with their system as far as trunking. We could see any RTS frame here. I think they might have 8 in this building, I think, so from any spot we could talk to. Obviously there was a lot of trunking in between that. This summer what we've added to that is another 32 channels direct to OMP. What that gives us is, and again, CBC being very gracious with us, allowed us to connect serially to their VLAN. So we weren't on we separated our network now, and what we added was a serial data pass-through over to our RTS frame at OMP. Now when you sit in 40 and you want to just scroll keys and you want to see something at OMP, you can. You can see any key panel that's at OMP, and you can trunk to that key panel. So that's what we've added there. What else? I'd say that's about it. So we go to the network. Nowadays, everybody knows pretty much you have to have a broadcast network, and we obviously have one at OMP. So this was a big undertaking because we needed a network on the 8th floor, on the 6th floor. We had needed it on the 10th floor. We needed it in closets that were in remote locations. So what we did is well, this is essentially our setup. We use GT cards over at OMP, so they give you 4 1 gig links. We had Cisco 4500 fiber switches to all our Cisco 2960 switches. Essentially, our control, OMP can see our Sure Accent workbench software, so they can actually on their side see and look at, is the battery dying on their control room? What's the level like? Have I had somebody jump on my frequency from OMP? So they can take a look at that system through ours. Obviously, Vista Link works that way. Yeah, it's just pretty much control. One of the add-ons that we're doing this year is that Simon, my colleague, is implementing and using the Magnum at OMP to do all our tally routing. So both stations will be controlled tally routing wise from OMP's Magnum. The other thing that we did is we had a Hockey Central at Noon show that we had to do out of here. We used the Sony BRC 900 cameras, and we had the Sony NXL IP55 encoder for that. The great thing about this is working with our guys, our people from the radio division, the Fan 590. Essentially, all we have is one person on site here for that show. Essentially, he just sets up the camera, puts them in their spots, total control. He uses a belt pack roll to talk to his producer over at OMP. And essentially, those feeds are sent into the encoder, and they have a decoder on their end. It will, and our radio guys uses the Wheatstone system, again, all over IP. So any audio from their headsets or anything else, they control independently from us. We were more involved with the video portion. It goes to a Ross crossover 12, and then they switch it at our radio office at OMP. It's a very clean system. Really no issues with this system at all, and they do the Hockey Central show from there. Again, it's just using a remote control room to control our studio here at CBC. Now I have a time-lapse video to show you, and the chances of this working are probably slim to nil. We had to move the camera a couple times because the set started building over the time lapse. So we didn't really, they didn't really know, I guess, where to put the camera originally.
So how many square feet was this?
I wouldn't be able to tell you.
I believe it's 11,000. That's the studio itself. You'll see when we get in, we haven't used every inch, but we've used most inches.
Okay, well, I'll show you the 3D image of our studio. Essentially, we have a desk in the middle. It spins probably 200 degrees. So you have our main desk that spins 200 degrees in the middle of the set. We have our Goliath over here. We send it two 1080i signals, and then the ORRAD mux it into one image on this side. We have our puck wall area here. They have some IRDs that they can go and trigger graphics in that sort of area. We have George's set, we call it. It's the interview set that he likes to do in the one corner. We have an upper and lower regional. The lower is where the fan fight, well, our Hockey Central at noon show is done out of. And the upper is more used in tandem sometimes with the main set. We also have a regional at the far door that was more used for Hockey Central tonight, our late night show, and for a lot of regional games. There was plenty of nights, probably two nights, maybe 1 or 2 nights a week that we'd have all 3 control rooms working out of this facility, our studio.
And Coach's Corner.
Yes, and Coach's Corner. Coach's Corner comes from Maine Regional. Saturday nights is actually a slow night for us because essentially it's just one control room that's going to be used that day. CBC sort of traffic cops all the games coming in, and that's the one show. So yeah, it's we have the demo wall as well, as I forgot. You know, the guys, they have the monitors in the floor, and they always do the hockey setup, and they throw their shoulders in and try to describe what they need to do on the rink. So it was pretty incredible to say, and I see, and I will say Dwayne's team at Rogers Media had a lot to do with the set, so I will give him credit for sure for the set. All right. Okay. So the ORAD display. Essentially, we have 5 HD GVGs, in our facility. They have 16 inputs, 8 outputs on each one. They are essentially, the other thing too is OMP. All right, I'll slow down here. OMP would, as far as control, we have TD client control on all our locations and all our control rooms. At first, we thought that the TD would be able to control all our video monitoring, but then we learned it was just over and coming. So what we did is we moved that to another operator. Essentially, every control room has a tablet, and it has a TD client on it. And if from TD client, they can control any source on any of the monitors. And how it really works is, using again our broadcast network, is that we have our graphics people at Rogers Media at King Street, and they would generate all the new graphics that are implemented. We have a NAS on the floor. And then from that NAS on our studio floor, those graphics or video clips or whatever they wanted transferred to that NAS. And essentially, we have 3 servers that control all our HDVGs. And we grouped it up. The set. Our set is sort of segmented, so because the big set is so large, we actually have 3 HD DVGs set up for our set in the main set. There's the Goliath. The Goliath, because of what it's doing and the processing power there, that's pretty much one, takes care of that. And then the puck wall and the rest of the set take good care of 2. So we have a control server that's using 3D play, and essentially how we segment it is server 1 would control 3 of the HDVGs and the main set. Server 2 would control the lower and upper regionals, and server 3 would control our regional set off to the side. The flexibility with this system is, as like I've already said many a times, is the ability to route anything and route high graphics to a lot of different spots. And the other thing that we did and we implemented later on in that year was AR. AR was kind of interesting because it brought up a lot of challenges. One of the challenges for broadcast people is the delay. You know, you're not going to buy frame syncs for 48 inputs of your switcher so you get delayed to the timing of the order. Essentially what we were doing is we were feeding the camera up to the router, back into the ORAD system back to the switcher. Well, obviously there's a delay there. So one of the interesting things that our production staff did is they set up an aux on their switchers, and they would switch the cameras on the aux, but the aux would be running through an X75 delayed properly. And then in the audio room, he'd be doing the same thing. He'd have a sub-menu or subgroup that he would delay the mics when they went. Most of the time what you see with AR is a lot of pre-packaged elements. Most of the time, I would say they very rarely use it live because there's so many elements of the, you know, what happens if a person just walks a little bit off their point and they walk through the graphic, right? Most of the time what they do is pre-tape it. But when they do it live, the interesting thing, and I give full credit to our production staff, is they'll cut out of that, and you really won't tell using sort of that system. They use SMPTE is the company. It's a Croatian company that does all the tracking on our jib, and it works in tandem with ORAD. There's really no other companies doing any encoding for the tracking. Other than that, it's just sort of a direct. It'll take the raw information from that SMPTE box, and it will track on the jib. Yeah, so it was an interesting concept, and I think it went over pretty well in our design. So I guess the next one is, and I'll just open it up to questions really. If any of you have any questions for me.
So how much new stuff did you have to purchase? And part B of that, with your tight timeline, how to do it, get delivery?
Well, most of when we first started doing our AutoCAD design, obviously, purchasing was already done. But I have to give credit to our suppliers. Like a lot of them we pushed a lot of buttons, and they got the material there in time. Some of it was, hey, we got it here, and now we can get it up and running, and we'd have it pre-wired before it even showed up. Essentially, is what we sort of did. And yeah, it was very tight that way, and I would just like to thank some of our suppliers for that.
Boy or a girl?
It was a boy. Yeah. All right. I don't know if anyone else has any other questions. I'm sorry you didn't get to see my full display. I apologize for that. But I thank you for your time.